Part 2, The Investigators. NYPD 14th Precinct, Homicide, New York City 1973 night. The air in the 14th Precinct Homicide Squad room was a toxic, visible stew. It was 3 parts stale cigarette smoke, 2 parts burnt coffee, 1 part stale sweat, and 1 part the coppery sweet tang of old, dried blood that had soaked into the wooden floorboards and refused to leave, no matter how many times it was mopped. The walls were a defeated, mustard yellow, peeling under the relentless hum of fluorescent lights. Typewriters clattered like a mechanical hailstorm. Phones rang, were answered with a bark, and slammed down. This was the world of Detective Martin Brody. He sat at his gray metal desk, a man in his late 50s, his face a roadmap of exhaustion. He was a good cop, one of the best. A closer. But he was tired. He wasn't just tired of the hours, he was tired of the species. He was staring at an 8x10 glossy photo. It wasn't a shark. It was a 22-year-old kid in a leather jacket, lying in an alley, his eyes wide open, a single, neat hole in his temple. A younger, uniformed cop, his face pale and sick, dropped a file on Brody's desk. Motive was a $20 bet, detective, the cop said, his voice barely a whisper. He bet the guy he couldn't hit a bottle from 20 yards with his old man's .22. The guy missed the bottle. Brody didn't look up. He just nodded slowly, absorbing the sheer, pointless, human-on-human waste of it all. This was his 9th homicide this month. He'd seen it all. Greed, passion, jealousy, revenge. He was a master of human predators, an expert in the grubby, predictable motives that made men kill each other. He was sick of it. He was sick of the why. "All right, kid," Brody said, his voice a gravelly monotone. "Go get some air. And a coffee. Tell him I want this alley sealed for another 12. The .22 casing is still in the drain pipe." "Right, detective." The kid fled, grateful to escape. Brody was left alone with the photo. He looked at the victim's stupid, surprised face, then slowly, deliberately, filed the photo away into a thick folder. He was closing the case, but the exhaustion remained. His captain, a bull-necked man named O'Malley, walked over, chewing on an unlit cigar. "You're not talkin' this one to trial, Martin." "Don't have to," Brody said, not turning around. "Kid's a blockhead. He'll confess to his priest, his mom, and probably his mailman by morning. He's not a killer. He's just a moron." "You're the best closer I got, Martin," O'Malley sighed. "You know that, right? The brass loves you. You see a pattern where everyone else just sees a mess." "That's the problem, Captain," Brody said, finally looking up. His eyes were gray and old. "The pattern's all the same. It's just stupid. I'm tired of the why. I'm tired of the alleys. I'm tired of the smell." O'Malley nodded. He knew the look. The burnout. "So, this is it, then?" O'Malley asked. "You're really pulling the pin." Brody turned in his chair. His eyes drifted to a small, sun-faded travel advertisement he'd torn from a Life magazine months ago, pinned to his bulletin board. It was a stark contrast to the wanted posters and bloody photos around it. It showed a perfect, calm, deep blue ocean. A white sand beach. A white picket fence. A happy family. Amity Island. A quiet place to live. "Yeah, I'm pulling the pin," Brody said. "My wife, Ellen, she found a place. An island. A nice, quiet island. An island. Jesus, Martin, you hate the water. You get seasick in the bathtub." "I can handle the water," Brody lied, his eyes still on the poster. "It's the people I need a break from." He picked up his hat. "I'm gonna go somewhere, quiet. Somewhere the only monster is a drunk tourist who needs a ride home. No more, why? No more predators. Just quiet." He walked out of the precinct, leaving the photo of the dead kid on his desk. He was a homicide detective, a master of human evil, and he was running away to the one place on Earth where a different kind of evil was waiting. Sandy Hook Beach, New Jersey 1974 to 5 a.m. The fog was a cold, wet wall. It muffled all sound, turning the gray pre-dawn light into a disorienting purgatory. The only noise was the weak, lapping surf and the crunch of boots on wet sand. This was a scene of grim, confusing carnage. A 40-foot orca lay on the beach like a fallen god. It was beached, bloated, and horrific. The stench of decay, salt, and low tide was overwhelming. Drive. Maren Elkins, in her 40s, was the only one who seemed unfazed. Dressed in full-body rain gear and heavy rubber gloves, she was all business. She was a mainstream scientist, the best forensic biologist on the East Coast. When a town had an impossible problem, they called her to debunk it. A young, rain-soaked local cop, Myers, held a large flashlight, his face pale green. "My grandfather saw the 16 attacks, Doctor," Myers said, his voice shaky. He was trying to make conversation, to fill the horrifying silence. "Right here, in Matawan Creek." He said the water, it ran red. "Is that what we have here? Is it back?" Elkins didn't look up from her work. She was kneeling by the massive carcass. "The 1916 shark was a shark, officer," Elkins said, her voice clipped and professional. She paused, her calipers clicking. "This is a mess." She was right. The evidence was a contaminated, contradictory nightmare. "This is what I know," Elkins said, dictating into a small tape recorder. "The animal has been dead for at least 72 hours, probably more. See this." She pointed to a series of smaller, ragged bites along the tail. "Scavenger bites. Consistent with blue sharks and crabs. Standard post-mortem." She moved up the body. "And this," she pointed to 3 clean, deep, parallel gashes on its back, "is a propeller. A big one. Consistent with a 40-foot fishing trawler. Your monster, officer, is a boat." Myers looked relieved. "So, a boat did that." He shined his flashlight on the other wound. "The main one. The one that had made him sick." Elkins stopped. She stood up. "It was not a bite. It was a wound. But it was impossible. It was a perfectly circular hole, roughly 10 feet in diameter, scooped clean out of the whale's side, right through the blubber and ribs. It looked as if a giant, geometric drill had been used." "My God," Myers whispered. "What did that?" Elkins, the bite radius expert, was baffled. She knelt, touching the edge of the perfect circle. The flesh wasn't torn or serrated like a shark bite. It was seared, cauterized, as if by an intense, unnatural cold. Sharks tear," she whispered, her scientific certainty vanishing. "They thrash. They don't drill." "A megalodon?" Myers asked. "A megalodon is a fossil, officer," Elkins snapped, her rational mind fighting back. "It's a fairy tale. This is." She stopped. Something else was wrong. A metal research tag was bolted to the orca's dorsal fin. It was thick, stainless steel, designed to withstand decades in the ocean. But it wasn't clean. It was crushed. It was warped and twisted, as if by an impossible magnetic force. The numbers were barely legible. "What could do that?" Myers asked. Elkins didn't answer. She leaned in closer. She smelled it. "Officer, do you smell that?" "Smell what?" "The whale." "No." Elkins's voice was now full of a new, academic terror. "It smells like ozone. Like a lightning strike. Like a dead battery." She looked at the geometrically perfect, cold-seared hole. She looked at the simple propeller gashes. She looked at the warped metal tag that smelled like ozone. Her mainstream rules were failing. This evidence was impossible. It was a boat, a geometric void, and an energy event, all at once. This was the bafflement and absence of laws you spoke of. She knelt again, this time inside the 10-foot scoop. She ran her gloved hand over the seared, fractured ribs. Her fingers brushed against something metal. "Myers, get the light here." She pointed. Lodged deep in the whale's rib, as if fired from a cannon, was a 3-inch, jagged fragment of dark, rusted steel. "Shrapnel?" Myers asked. "From the boat?" "No," Elkins said. She pulled out a pair of forceps and carefully worked the piece free. It was heavy. And it was cold. So unnaturally cold, a wisp of vapor came off it in the damp morning air. This is shrapnel," she whispered. "But it's not from a trawler." She turned it over in her palm. Stamped into the metal, faint but unmistakable in a 1940s-era U.S. Navy font, were 2 lines of text. "Olis. ... California 35. Elkins stared. Her mind, the mainstream mind, tried to find a rational explanation. A 30-year-old piece of shrapnel, from a ship that sank 5,000 miles away, embedded in a freshly killed whale, next to a geometric hole that smelled like ozone. So, what do I tell the mayor? The cop asked. Boat or shark? Elkins, the rationalist, was deeply unsettled. She was a woman of physical, measurable facts, and her facts had just broken her brain. She looked at the impossible puzzle, and for the first time in her career, she had no answer. Tell him, she said, her voice shaking, tell him. I don't know. Montauk Harbor, Field Lab 1974 day. A chaotic, expensive, private lab in a converted boat garage. The room stank of formaldehyde and chemicals, but it was organized. This was the fringe, but it was a well-funded fringe. Drive. Matt Hooper, in his late 20s, was a computer nerd who loved to get his hands dirty. He had used his family's money to set up this private lab, far from the stifling bureaucracy of Woods Hole, to hunt the one thing he really believed in: anomalies. He was not a physicist. He was a fringe biologist. A cryptozoologist with a PhD. His lab was filled with his obsessions. Jars contained grotesquely deformed fish. Photos of beached deer with strange, unexplainable tumors were pinned to the wall. He was running early stage for 1974 DNA tests on tissue samples. He was ranting into a tape recorder, a manic grin on his face. Subject 7, a local sand shark, clear evidence of recombinant genetic markers. The sequencing is a mess. Subject 8, a fawn, washed up on the beach, shows signs of viral hybridization. It's not industrial dumping, it's engineering. He jabbed a finger at a map on his wall, at the X, marking Plum Island Animal Disease Center just across the water. It's you, he whispered. You're lying about your containment. You're creating chimeras. And I'm going to prove it. He was the Mulder of oceanography, the conspiracy theorist, with a PhD, and he was convinced he was on the verge of the biggest discovery in modern biology. He was hunting mutations. Umalik's cabin, day. This was the third lab. It wasn't clean like Hooper's or practical like Elkins's. It was obsessive. The cabin was a single, dark room, lit by a desk lamp. The air smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and that same faint, sharp scent of ozone. This was the paranoid thriller. The walls were invisible, buried under a chaotic, meticulous spiderweb of maps, charts, newspaper clippings, and pieces of red string connecting them all. This was the home of Jacob Umalik, the guerrilla researcher. Umalik, in his 60s, his face a mask of deep, earned wisdom and a profound, quiet sadness, sat at his desk. He was a survivor. On his desk, next to a stack of books, was a single, polished killer whale tooth. He'd rub it when he was thinking. The orca incident hadn't just been a fight, it had been an education. It had taught him, in blood and ice, that the ocean thinks, feels, and remembers. He was not a mystic. He was a historian of the paranormal. And he was hunting the world's most prolific serial killer. We see his wall of research. It's a timeline of the impossible. A 1952 newspaper clipping, yellowed with age, from a Georgia paper. Shark attack 12 miles up Savannah River. Victim, pulled apart. A 1958 clipping from Miami. Freak drowning of local fishermen. Pulled straight down, says witness. A 1964 clipping from San Diego. Boating, accident, baffles experts. Hull, warped inwards. No sign of crew. Umalik had spent years on this. These weren't shark attacks. They were wrong. There was no feeding pattern. No territorialism. They were executions. But he was stuck. He had a pattern, but no motive. No connection. He went to a dusty, locked footlocker in the corner. He opened it. It was filled with his research, the research that had made him a pariah at Woods Hole, the research that got him laughed out of conferences. He pulled out an old, declassified U.S. Navy file. USS Indianapolis. Sunk. 1945. Crew. 1,195. Survivors. 316. He opened it. It was the full survivor roster. He carried it back to his wall, his hands shaking. He looked at the Savannah River clipping from 1952. Victim, Charlie Johnson. He scanned the Indianapolis roster. Johnson, Charles P. Seaman 2nd Class. He found him. His blood ran cold. He grabbed the 1964 San Diego clipping. Missing, Arthur F. Smith. He scanned the roster. Smith, A. F. Gunner's mate. Check. The Miami drowning, Luis M. Fernandez. Roster, Fernandez, L. M. Fireman. Check. He stood back, his heart hammering. It wasn't a rash of attacks. It was a harvest. A slow, patient, 30-year collection of the Indianapolis survivors. My God, he whispered. His paranormal curse was real. He realized, with a soul-crushing terror, that this serial killer was supernatural. And it was running out of victims. He ran back to the Indianapolis roster, his hands fumbling. Who's left? Who is left? He scanned the list, crossing off the names of those he knew had died of old age, of cancer, of drink. He got to the bottom of the list. One name, one last name, with a recent address scrawled next to it in his own messy handwriting. Quint, R. Amity Island. Umalik stood frozen. It wasn't a pattern anymore. It was a countdown, and the killer was coming for the last survivor. He grabbed his briefcase. He started tearing his research off the wall, the clippings, the maps, the Indianapolis roster. He was no longer a fringe researcher. He was the only man on Earth who knew why the monster was coming, what it was, and where it was going. He ran out of the cabin, leaving the whale tooth behind. He was done with the past. He was racing to stop the future. Montauk Harbor, Field Lab, later that day. Hooper was sketching a diagram of a hybridized cell structure, convinced he was on the verge of proving his Plum Island theory, when his phone rang. He wiped the gore on his apron and answered, annoyed. Drive. Hooper's Lab of Anomalies. Matt. It's Marin Elkins. Hooper's grin vanished. He was surprised. Marin, I'm shocked you're calling. Last I heard, you told the board my Plum Island chimeras were just sick gear. There was a long pause on the line. He could hear the wind and the surf in the background. Matt. Elkins's voice was different. It was no longer arrogant. It was tense and quiet. Quote. I'm in New Jersey. I'm looking at a geometrically perfect hole, 10 feet in diameter, seared into an orca. Hooper stopped sketching. His eyes went wide. Seared. A hole. A piece of solid steel, crushed like tinfoil, that smells like a lightning strike, and, Matt. I'm holding a piece of shrapnel I pulled from the bone. It's stamped, CA-35. Hooper dropped his scalpel. California 35, the Indianapolis. It sank in the Pacific, Elkins whispered. In 1945, you're the anomaly guy, Matt. You're the only anomaly guy. How fast can you get here? Hooper's fringe world of small, deformed fish had just collided with Elkins's mainstream world, and her anomaly was bigger than his. He was already tearing off his apron, his mind racing. His conspiracy was real. Fade to black.